I'm going to be building some of the forms for the last page of the website demo that we've been doing. I've changed it a little bit back again. I've changed my navigation from about to learning, even though it's still all about road trips, and instead of contact page, I've got here take the quiz. And so I'm going to be building just some forms for a quiz. I think that I just ran through it, and I think I'm going to also offer, instead of necessarily forcing everybody to be on exactly the same page with this one, I think you can still do a contact form if you prefer. If I have time, I'll do that in this demo right now. And if not, then I'll just do it at the beginning of class tonight before we jump off into learning the JavaScript. So first things first, we've been doing CSS for a week. Now we're back to doing HTML again. And so let me open up make sure I'm on the right page here. I'm going to open up the quiz.html and I'll work on this. So this should be a quiz form now. And so first things first, forms usually will exist within a form element in the HTML. They don't always have to. Sometimes just for the sake of interface, you might have different forms that are just have some sort of interface function, that is being worked by JavaScript behind the scenes. So occasionally you'll just see a button out in the middle of nowhere that's not inside a form element. But normally speaking, they're going to go inside of forms. So a form looks like thus, and it's got certain attributes that you'll see almost all the time. Well, no, most of the time, I'll say. More than half the time, at least. You've got a form where data is meant to be collected from the user and maybe sent somewhere. Maybe sent to another page or a PHP page, or maybe sent to the server, directly to the database, who knows what. But one of those is going to be a method attribute, and there are several different things can go in here. The two most common ones are either get or post, and post is the most common one of those, and we don't really have a whole time to go on a lot into details about which is which, but the basics of it is that get values are good for shorter amounts of data, and when they are sent, or when they're grabbed from the browser, they actually appear in the address bar. So when someone types in like their name and password, if you're using a get method, once they hit enter, it'll show up in the address bar for the remainder of time that they've got that page loaded or the resulting page loaded. And so anyone can look over their shoulder in the office or at Starbucks or whatever and see what their password is. So generally speaking, you don't use get when there is longer amount of data or when it's at all sensitive. And post, I'd say, happens most of the time with these. When we do this, I'll go ahead and at some point, maybe when I'm doing the other one, I'll switch to a method equals get, and we'll see what happens when we enter in some data, and then with the data still selected, instead of entering it, just go ahead and hit refresh. And sometimes if you do that in the browser, you can get these subqueries that are the get values. You can get them showing up in the address bar like that. Often we'll have an action, and this is just telling the browser where, like the user submits this form, where is it supposed to go? Where's the data supposed to be sent? Usually it's being sent to a PHP file. We're not going to be sending the data anywhere. We're just going to be staying on this page. So we can go ahead and do without that. But just be aware that most of the time you do see an action on there, and it's referencing another file generally. And then just usually some kind of ID. I don't think we're going to need it this time, because there's just going to be one form on the page, but if there's any chance there's multiple forms on the page, it sure helps to have different IDs to make them easy to grab with JavaScript and with CSS. So I'll just call this one ID equals quiz. Never hurts to give it a name. Alrighty. So what I'm doing is I'm focusing on radio buttons for this one because I'm building a quiz, and it's just going to be a multiple choice quiz where for each of the 3 questions the user can select either true or false. And radio buttons are so called because on old radios, you guys don't remember this, but I barely do. On old radios, they would have 2 big round buttons on the front, and they were on and off. And you could hit one, and when you punched it in, the other one would punch out, and then you'd be turning it on, and then when you punched the one on the bottom, the one on top would pop out, and it was like whack-a-mole, right? And then that would turn the radio off. So that's where the name comes from. And that should tell you something about the interface of that particular kind of form. If you have a radio group, the user can only select one at a time. They select one, all the other ones are unchecked. They then select a different one, and the first one is selected, unchecked then. If you want something where the user is able to select multiple options, then you use checkboxes instead. And like I say, if you're ordering pizza toppings, like you want the user to be able to select more than one pizza topping, so you give them checkboxes instead so they can select multiple. Now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pushing the use of field sets and legends. And right off the bat, I can go ahead and show you what this looks like in a browser, but let's get something into the legend here. So actually, you know what, let's go ahead and save this. Right off the bat, we'll see, and I've got this open in the browser, so I've got the form there, and it's just this box. And it's not just for appearance, it also helps group your forms thematically. So like, let's say you're ordering something online, and you've got a box that's full of information about your payment info, and then you got another box that's filled with your physical, your street address info, right? Those would almost certainly be put into two different field sets, just a way of organizing the fields, especially if they get a bit longer. In this case, I'm going to have one field set around each of my 3 questions. And okay, so the legend, let me go ahead and go to the learning page. I'm going to open this up in a new tab so we've got both of them open. And I have not made learning yet, is that right? Well, let's see, maybe I still haven't changed the names of these guys, so let me go ahead and do that in here. Yeah, this is still called about, so let me change that to learning. I thought I had changed all this. Oh yeah, I did do all this. I did this, I just didn't change the name. So let me go back to the browser and see if that works now. Yeah, there we go. So I just copied and pasted some of this stuff here in order to get my question. So let's see. I think that large land masses, this is one of the ones I wanted to do. So large land masses are most common for road trips. So this is going to be a true-false question. After reading this stuff, they're going to put this, answer these questions on the quiz page. So here we go in the quiz, and I'm going to put this into the legend. Now, it doesn't have to be there. You could have a more generic title, shorter title in the legend, and then have this like in a paragraph underneath or something like that. But just to show how this works and how it shows up in a browser, there it is. So I've got the legend, and that becomes kind of like a title for the field box. Now let's go ahead and get a couple of questions. Actually, no, I've got the question. We're going to get a couple of radio buttons in there. So radio buttons look like this. Almost all form fields are inputs. There are some other ones like text area and so on, but input, you've got type equals text, type equals email, type equals number, type equals tel for telephone numbers, type equals submit, type equals reset, all different kinds of inputs for a form. And the one that I'm going to be doing is input type equals radio. So save that and go over here, and you can see that's what it looks like. Everybody knows what this guy is. Notice when I select it, I can't deselect it again. In order to deselect it, the idea is that you have more than one. You click on one of the other ones, and then that one deselects. So let's go ahead and get some text in here for this. A lot of form fields, the text is expected to become before the field, but for radio buttons and checkboxes, because they align nicely on the left-hand side, it's expected that the text that goes along with it, called the label text, comes afterwards. So I'm just going to have a true and false. And actually, let me go ahead and copy this. We're going to have to make some modifications here. This is not going to be enough as it is. But just to show what they look like now, there we go, true and false. Okay, so here's the true one, and I can click on that, false, and whoops, I'm being allowed to select both of them at the same time. As we know, that's not good for radio buttons. That's not the way they're supposed to behave. So in order to make it so that the user can only select one at a time, I have to make a radio button group. The same way you make a checkbox group, so that all of those possible entries that they can make are connected with or collected within the same kind of bucket of data that's going to be sent off to the server. So let's give this a name. And it can be as semantic or as generic as you want to. I'm going to keep mine very generic for right now. I'm just going to call it question 1. And I'm going to give the same name down here. Name equals question 1. Save that, go back over to the browser and refresh, And now, click one. If I click the other one deselects. So now I'm getting the actual radio button action. That's what you want from these guys. You still want to do that even if you've got a checkbox group instead. Get them into a group by giving them the same name. As it turns out, all form fields that are not just submit or reset or something, all the data that's going to be sent somewhere has to have two pieces of information attached to it. It has to have a name and it has to have a value. Basically, if I had a submit button in the form and I sent this off to process.php or whatever, and the user had selected one of these, well, the processing page would know that they had made an entry in the question 1 question, but they wouldn't know which entries they had made. So the name that you put on here is not just an interface. It's actually like what's going to be the variable name for this information when it gets sent somewhere else. And then the value is the data piece that's going to be, that variable is going to be referencing. So in this case, I have to give it a value. And I'm just going to do value equals true or value equals false. Past couple of days, I've had a rough time typing. I don't know why. Okay, so save that and refresh over here. And no interface change now. It's all the same thing. But now, if I send this stuff anywhere, basically the PHP page will be able to grab question 1 as a variable. You'd have to give it a slightly different name because you can't have hyphens in variable names in PHP or JavaScript. But still, question _1 would be the variable that this piece of data would be stored in, and the value for that variable would be either true or false depending on what's entered here. That's the way these things basically work. All right, let's go ahead and get these guys inside of legends. One thing that people like to do in interfaces is, instead of having to aim with the cursor for this little control here, it's very handy to people to be able to select the text. You guys have been on pages where I could just click on false or click on true and have this go back and forth. It's also a good thing for accessibility in general. So each one of these, I'm going to wrap this into a label. So when I put a label around this, I am wrapping not only the text, but also the control itself. So the control and the text that goes next to it all held within this label element. Now watch what happens now. Actually, let me go ahead and do it on both of them. Copy the text wrapping, save it, and refresh. And now watch, I can just click on the text. I don't have to aim for that tiny little control. It's not working for false. Let's see what I'm doing wrong. Input label, I close it off here, or rather, code closes it off for me. There we go. Now I can select both of those just by clicking on this. This is one of the things that I'm going to be requiring no matter which fields you have in your quiz or your contact page. I'm going to be definitely requiring labels for all of your forms. Okay, so I think that's it as far as this one. Now we haven't applied any CSS to it, and we're not going to yet. But yeah, ultimately I'm just going to do some simple CSS to get these guys one above the other. I think that that's easier to read when they're stacked vertically instead of horizontally. And then maybe a couple other hoops just to get this a little bit of spacing. I don't know if we'll use Flexbox for that or what. We'll figure it out. So this is my first question. And then, so to get the second question, all I have to do is copy the whole thing. An extra space between them here. And see if I can pull this in a bit without closing it. I definitely want to change the name here. You cannot have the same name or else, well, let's see what happens here. If I have them all the same name, then even though they're in different field sets, like it's all being treated as one unit, right? I can only select one. So I select false up here, and then I try to select true up here, and my first question gets deselected. So it's got to be a different name for these guys down here. It's a different radio group. The values can be the same, that's fine. It's almost in a different namespace now, you could think of it as. It's a different variable name, different bucket. And I need to get a different question for this one. And so my next one is, I was going to do from this one. There is consensus. I'm going to do the opposite of this one, so the correct answer will be false. And let's see, here we are, and this goes into the legend. And I'm just going to change the wording just a little bit. So there is consensus. as to what distance or time must be traveled. And so because the article said the opposite of that, the correct answer here is going to be false. And then I will do one more. And immediately change the name so I don't forget. That's crucial. It's probably the most important thing to make sure it happens. And let's grab my third question. Here we go. In the United States, a road trip typically implies leaving the state. So that'll be my question number 3, which goes into my legend here. And there we go. So yeah, this one exists. The quiz is the simpler of the two possibilities, I think, because it only really involves one kind of control other than these buttons that we're going to put at the bottom. So I think that's the most straightforward one. I think that only took less than 20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and then maybe we'll take a look at what the contact form might look like. We'll be able to save a little time on that by copying and pasting the big stuff and then just changing the fields inside of here. So you might see one or two of two possible buttons down below here. So generally these go outside of field sets because they're not part of the organization of data. They're just for controlling the form itself. And usually what you'll see is you'll see a submit button, or else the user can't submit the form anywhere. But you also might see a reset button. Now these are both inputs, just like these guys are inputs, and checkboxes are inputs, and text fields are inputs, and so on. In fact, I'm having trouble coming up with anything, a form control that's not an input other than text area. I'm sure there are others. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. Oh, of course, the select box drop down. Okay, so yeah, that's another one where you do a list box. That's in the reading too. I don't think I'll have time to go over it in here. But generally speaking, in fact, almost universally speaking, you want to use these radio buttons and checkboxes only when you've got a very short number of questions in each, field set here and into each group. Like here, 2 is a perfect amount for checkboxes and radio buttons. Maybe 3. Checkboxes, of course, can get a little bit larger, especially, if you think about that example I thought of earlier about ordering pizza toppings, right? Now, you could have definitely more than 2 or 3 of those. But if you get into a really long list, like asking someone from what state they were born in or something like that, where you've got 50 states plus territories, you're not going to want to have 50 radio buttons on the page, trust me. You're going to want to have a select box instead, or a list box, a drop-down menu. So that's another possibility for your forms page here, and I could demo that. I could do a recording over the weekend on that. That one's not difficult to do either. But anyway, let's go ahead and do these inputs here. So input type equals reset here. We've got one of these guys in here, and that's all the information it needs. This is not information. This is a form that instead of getting sent somewhere, it's just a form to control the form itself. Or yeah, it's a control to control the form itself. It's an interface thing. So if I have got this button here, and I put in some values here, let's say false, false, false. I think these are all false, and I'm not too confident about that. Maybe I should reset, and then it empties the form again without reloading the page, which is kind of nice. This can actually be used as a submit button of sorts if that's what you need to do. If you need to grab the data from the form and then empty it without refreshing the page, then you can use a reset button for that. I haven't seen it commonly used for that, but it can be handy for that from time to time. But the actual way to submit a form, 2 different ways to do it. I'll start with the input. Type equals submit, like this. And so if you've got this down at the bottom there, there's the submit button, and it says that. Now it says different things in different browsers. Like I'm in Edge right now, it says submit. I believe in Firefox it says submit query or something like that. It's up to the browser. If you need to say something in particular, then you can give it a value here. Value equals send it, or whatever is appropriate for your branding for your website. And there it goes. There it shows. So that's in the value attribute. I believe you can do the same thing for reset. But usually don't want to. So now that I've got this input type equals submit is not just a button, it actually does something here. So let's say I select all true for all of these and then click on my submit button. You might not see it, but the whole page flickered for a moment when I did that. Let me do it again. I'll do false and then send, and the whole page flickered and these emptied out. So you might think, well, it's the same thing as reset, but it's not. What it's actually doing is it's taking the data here and it's sending it to the browser and it's refreshing the page. And normally, if we had something in the action attribute up here, which I deleted, then it would take the data and would send us to a new page. That's what it would do. But in the absence of this action, it assumes that the page is to send it to itself. And so it actually closes the page and reopens the page. So it's a refresh. It's a hard refresh is what it does. So that's worth knowing. There's another way of doing an input. Let's say I wanted an input that says send it. I'm going to comment this out. And each one is perfectly valid. I personally like this way of doing it. Just putting a button and then just typing in the text that you want there. That'll do it. If there's a button without any other attributes or anything that's inside a form, the browser treats it like an input type equals submit. You don't have to do anything else. And like I said, yes, refresh. I like that one. Let's call it something slightly different. Check or something like that. I don't know, just to see that it is in fact a different element that we're doing. There it is. We do all trues and check, and boom, it does the same thing. Empty the field, refresh the whole page, so we're starting as if we're loading this page from scratch right off the bat. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get rid of this extraneous thing here. I don't know what happened here. There we go. Let's do another one really quickly. So I'll go ahead and, sorry, let me get another. Hey, I wasn't expecting to do this, but I think I can real quick. I'm going to go to the contact page, which thankfully I did not delete. Let's go ahead and just change a couple things here. This is going to be something like get in touch. It used to be questions. Doesn't really matter. And this is going to be contact form. Okay, so I'm going to start by copying and pasting the whole form so we don't have to type the whole thing in from scratch. As you guys know, normally I would do that, but time is of the essence. Let's get just this guy done here. And I'll change the ID here. Even if they're on different pages, it doesn't hurt to give it an ID that actually, I don't know, says something about what kind of content we've got in there. Okay, so I'm going to delete the stuff that we've got inside here, except for the legends. Let's see, do I want the legends? Yeah, I guess I do. So let me just get rid of these labels and inputs here. And I can leave the reset and I'll switch this back to send or something like that, since we're asking the user to send their information to us. So let's see, let's call this your contact info. And then here we're going to say, yeah, give us your feedback or something. Tell us what you learned here. And then let's see, the last one. Let's see, what am I going to do for the last one? Let's see, we'll give them a request to stay in touch. If they want to start receiving emails from us or something like that, then they can do just a little checkbox down here. Okay, so your contact information, this is going to be a different kind of form. Not a different kind of form, a different kind of control. Excuse me. So on the other one, on the quiz, we did all radio buttons. This time, I'm actually asking users to input information. Here, they're not really inputting information, they're just selecting from information that's already there. So when they click on this radio button, they've entered a value of true here, but we've already specified for this. They cannot use a radio button to put in their own custom data. It has to be either true or false. Those are the only choices they've got. So in here, we want them to have something a little bit more variable so that they can actually enter in their actual names. So let's go ahead and we already know we're going to need labels for these guys, right? Like so. And I'm going to show you a different way of doing a label too, just because that's what your textbook shows. But let's go ahead and get it in here first. And remember I was saying that anything other than radio buttons and checkboxes, the text tends to come before the field instead of afterwards. So let's say your first name. And then we will do an input type equals and text. So just a simple text field, like a piece of text, like a string in procedural programming, right? Input type equals text. We still need to give it a name. Now let's call this F name. So this will no longer have anything to do with the interface the way that this one did. We had the name here actually forms the radio group, right? And it determines what you can select at, at the same time and so on. This one won't do anything like that as far as the interface goes, but it's still the bucket for the data that's being sent to the database or to the other page or whatever. So now the variable is going to be what the user enters in here. That's going to be the value rather, and then the variable name is going to be still like this app name here. So, and this is all contained within the label. Let's go ahead and go over here, and I'll just go to contact.html, and there it is. That's what the form field looks like, and the label still works, so I can tap on this, and then we'll start typing on to aim with control. Now, let's take a look at the other way of doing this. I'm going to create one of these. Your last name. And then I'm going to put the input control outside of the label. Still type equals text. This one gets a different name. This is for the last name, so name equals fname. And like that. So the label is outside of the input. Now, when I do this, notice they go side to side. We're going to have to do a little bit of CSS jumping around in order to get this fixed, but for now, it's fine. The default formatting for forms in HTML and CSS is pretty bad. I don't know why they did it like this. Anyway, yeah, if I select first name here, I can click on the text in order to do that. I cannot click on the text here and select this guy because the input is not outside, or the input is not inside the label. But here's what I can do to change this if I want to. I can do label for equals, and then, I don't know, last name. It could be the same as the name here if you wanted. Let's go ahead and get these onto a couple of lines so you can see it a little bit better. Actually, now I can put this there. There we go. So here's the label, and then the input down here. And what would have to happen in order for this to work, this for has to match an ID attribute down here. Equals. And then it has to match, so last name, like so. So I save this, and I go over here and refresh. I can still do it in the first name, and now I can click on the label text here, and it will select and activate and focus that form field. So you can do it either which way you want. You can have the label text and the input all nested inside of label, or you can use the for and ID attributes and match them up. I personally think this one's much easier, and I don't think it even mentions this in the textbook, at least not in the reading on these forms here in chapter 13. I just think it's easier. I don't need to put on these extra attributes and so on, but it's totally up to you. They work exactly the same way. So I will go ahead and leave these up in the demo so you can see that, yeah, they both work. I think the one time this would really be useful is if for some reason you wanted to separate these two. So if for some reason you wanted to have the control somewhere and then have the form like somewhere else entirely, like say down in the footer or something like that, then you could do that, right? You could click up here, and when I do, that form field down here is activated. It's focused. But I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but I mean, you could if you needed to. So that would be the one time I think where that sort of thing would really be useful. But again, it's totally up to you. Okay, so tell us what you learned here, and that's inside the legend. So I will do, and let's go ahead and do the for actually. This might be a better use for it. So for equals, let's see, learning. Let's just say stuff I learned. This is pretty terrible text content, but that's okay. And then let's do a simple text area. And we'll have to put an ID and a name on this. And I'll do it this way so you can see that you can have a name and ID be the same value. And in fact, it's pretty common to do that despite what I did up here. So in this case, the ID is only to connect it to this for attribute on the label. This is where it will become the variable name on the PHP page or whatever, and then the data will be what's entered in here. So what's the difference between a text field and a text area? Well, if I refresh over here, it doesn't look like much, but actually, so the text field is just to type in one line, and that's it. It's a string. Whereas this guy down here is to do multiple lines, right? So if you really want someone's feedback, if you want someone to be able to write a couple of paragraphs and send it to you, then they use the text area instead. And of course you can select it like that. You can resize this, which is no good. We'll fix that in CSS. We'll make it start out by making it a bit bigger, and we'll resize it. I just realized there's something else I want up here as well. So now that we've got the label and text area separated here, let's go ahead and go back to doing this simple way up here, because it's kind of bugging me up there. I'll just fix this real quick. There we go. That's better. And then let's do, I just realized that we're going to ask them if we want to stay in touch, and we haven't asked them for their email address. So we better do that. This will be up here within the contact information section here. So one more. And then your email address. And then let's do input type equals. This will also show that there are other kinds of text fields besides just text. So you can do type equals email, and name equals contact, right? It could be the same thing as the type in this case, and often is, but let's just say we call it contact, because that's going to be the variable name on our PHP page later on. And now we've got first name, last name, email address, and if I try to submit this with something other than even an email address, see, I'm already getting some HTML5 validation. It's saying, please put an @ in the email address, because we know that's not an email address. And then we send it, and then it allows us to do it. We'll take a look at some other kinds of, in fact, let's go ahead and put it in now. These do not have any such thing built in, these text forms, but we could do a required, just a simple required. This is an empty attribute on these guys. And let's see, we probably don't want text area required. Yes, continue. So let's go ahead and try to send, and now it's giving us, yeah, okay, whatever. Send, and the required is not working. Am I on the right page? Oh, I put required instead of required. There we go. Let's see. And don't put it inside the quotes either. Continue. Let's try resending, and now we're starting to get validation on those guys too. So I didn't have to do any JavaScript or jQuery or that, anything like that. It's validating these guys because required, and it validates the email form by default anyway. I don't have to tell it required. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'm just going to put a label and a checkbox down here. Oops, better put that into an actual HTML element. Input type equals checkbox, and name equals, see, I already used contact, didn't I? Let's see, I guess I'll change this one up back up here to email, and then we'll do name equals contact down here, and value equals true. And then, yes. Okay, refresh over here. Yes, continue, thank you. And now we've got this little checkbox where you can change touch, and because it's not a radio button, you can say, oh wait, no, I didn't mean to click that, and deselect it before you send. Okay, well, that wound up being a bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but this will give us our two basic possibilities going forward on the project. My idea when I got up this morning was that, yeah, everybody's going to do a quiz. And then I thought, well, you know, I'm not learning, but quiz, here we go. One of these guys. And this is, like I said, it's the simpler one because they're all radio buttons, and that's going to make it easier to process them using JavaScript and like give the user the answers to the questions and tell them how many they got right and so on. But for the contact, I think we can make something work for this as well. If you don't want to do the quiz and you want to do a contact page instead as originally planned, then we can do something like this instead. I'm sure we can. Okay, that's it. CSS and JavaScript on these guys a bit later on.